everyone. This is Terry Mitchell with the Voice on Fire interview series, the Interviews with Intention. For those of you who may not have followed on before, I like to interview people that I find fascinating. They're the change agents, the difference makers, the action takers, they're life influencers. They're people that are on a mission to make a difference somewhere across their local community, or perhaps have an impact across our global village. My guest today certainly fits into that criteria, and Coby Liew, it's going to be fabulous to have a conversation with you. Welcome to the Voice on Fire interview series.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Terry. Thanks for inviting.
Absolute pleasure. So we're going to be talking with Coby today about his project, and he's got a fascinating story to share with us throughout the course of this interview. So Coby, what I'd really like to ask of you firstly, and we have shared the primary questions with you, so there's a little bit of a chance for you to think about the important story that you'd like to share with our audience today, what it is you do. So let's dive deep into that.
Oh, Terry, and that's actually a big question. Like, what do I do? Because I do a lot of things in my life. Yeah, I guess I can start from, I suppose, what I do now, like, professionally, and that has a lot to do with my personal story as well. So I work in a counselling space. So I'm a registered psychotherapist. I'm doing clinical work with, day-to-day work with people who have gone through different mental health issues in their life.
Yeah.
So that's in a nutshell what I do in my professional space. And why do I say that has a lot to do with my personal story as well? Is because every time when I talk to clients, I see a bit of myself in their stories, because when you talk about like domestic violence or family abuse or all this depression, anxiety, and suicide attempts, all of these things, I've gone through all of that in my life. So that's why every time when I talk to them, I just see a part of myself in them. And because I have walked through those journeys myself, and I have come to terms with my past as well. So I'm now very comfortable with my past, and I don't have any issues talking about them because they no longer have any effect on me.
Yes.
So I'm now in a space where I want to help people. I want to support people because of the journey that I've been through. And that explains why I'm doing what I'm doing now. So it doesn't look like a work. It's not a work for me because it's a passion. It becomes a passion that I hold on dearly in my life. That I think one thing that I really enjoy what I'm doing now is I'm actually living my passion now. So I'm doing what I love. Yes, it's very exhausting, very stressed, and very tiring with the job because you get all this negative energy, and vibes from people every day. So it does get quite exhausting with my work, but with that exhaustion, I actually feel happy about it. I actually feel like this is one of the. I've done many jobs in the past as well, and this is the only one that I wouldn't call it a job. I would call it my passion, and it just keeps me going because I know that every day, everyone that I talk to, I have made, be it big or small, I've made a difference in someone else's life.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes me feel like, okay, now I'm just going to go ahead and do this for the rest of my life until the day that I couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, no, I totally hear what you're saying in terms of the wanting to make a difference and knowing that sometimes it's our own story that makes the difference. And that kind of is a bit of a segue into asking you a little bit about the project that is part of what you do. So share with our audience what it is that you have created and you're the founder of. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. So I've just recently actually found a project, and it's called Unspoken Story. So how it came about was really interesting. Well, because one of my specialization is working with men. Okay, with behavioral issues and whatnot. And then from the beginning of this year, I started getting a lot of referrals from, from the court and from the Justice Department, and in terms of behavioral issues and whatnot, from men. And then when I have a chat with them, and I constantly, one thing that came to me is how a lot of these men that I work with, they constantly tell me how afraid they are when it comes to being vulnerable. And they keep telling me that they're no good with feelings, they don't really feel comfortable talking about it, and that's why they internalize a lot of their issues with them. They said to me that growing up, they've been told that they have to be like man up, toughen up, don't be a pushy, grow some balls, and all of these words.
Those negative words, yeah.
So they said being men is actually very tiring and very, very exhausting as well, because I feel like sometimes they're not allowed to say, this is the word that they say, they're not allowed to be sad, they're not allowed to talk about feelings, because people would perceive it as weak, that you're too weak, as a man. I even have clients that come and tell me that, in this day and age, you almost have to feel ashamed to be a man.
Yeah.
People are telling me this. So after hearing their stories and whatnot, and they internalize a lot, because they thought, all right, it's no good to talk about feelings, therefore I just internalize it. And that's why you see a lot of men, they just brush things under the carpet, they don't really deal with it. They thought that they've moved on, but actually they haven't, right?
Absolutely.
So they internalize a lot of things, and then there's only so much we can take in our life, right?
Absolutely.
So it just got pushed to a point where they feel like that's it, it's done, and that's why they outburst, they go into violent, that physical action, and some even commit suicide, right?
Yeah.
So I went and did some research online, and I found out that the statistic that collected by the Australian Bureau of Statistics is that in Australia, our average daily suicide rate in Australia, 7 out of 9 that those who are suicide are men.
Yep.
So there's a very high suicide rate that are men. And then that's what prompted me to think, gosh, I'm in a privileged position now where I work directly with men, and I hear all these stories from men, which they hardly ever tell anyone about what they've gone through, right? Yeah. So I felt like, I don't like this. I need to change societal perception about this. I need to challenge what the society thinks about men, and all these expectations that the society expect a man to behave, or so I said, being a social advocate myself, is I fight for social justice and equality, those values. So I thought, no, I'm not liking this, so I'm going to challenge the societal expectation on this. So I decided to use my skills in terms of my creative skills, because I love photography, and also my privilege, the privilege that I have to listen to all these heartbreaking stories from the people that I work with, and I thought maybe I can do something about it and create something out of this, right? And then I've heard about the Humans of New York, a long time ago. And then I thought that is actually a very good idea to tell people's stories, right? And then because I also love photography, so I thought, okay, so why not I'll study what Humans of New York's doing, and then maybe I can tweak it a little bit and create a different version of the project. So I came out with, all right, I'm going to adopt similar strategies from there, but I'm going to tell people's real life stories, like stories that they don't really. It's people that they are the stories that people fear to talk about, people that don't feel comfortable talking about, and those are the stories that that real life people actually go through every day.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's how it all came about. And then I look at the project, and so far I've interviewed more than 35 men. So all of those stories, I interviewed them personally, and I listened to them, and I collect their stories, and then I become the storyteller. So I tell their stories, right? So that's how I plan, proceed with this project. And then with the stories that I collected, I'll be publishing them in a book, so that people can read, these unspoken stories. And that's my way, I think, a softer way to advocate for change. Because when you advocate for change, there are different ways. You can go out and protest, you can do rally, and that kind of thing. But I prefer the softer way of doing it, which is through all these stories telling, publications, and then all these things, to and hopefully that through all these strategies and methods, that it will bring more awareness to the society of all these damaging expectations that we have on people. And so basically the Unspoken Story is a big project. Underneath the project itself, there are different series. So the first series is about unspoken stories related to men. And then the second series will be unspoken stories related to migrants in Australia. And then the third series, will be stories related to being a woman, women. And then the fourth one that I've planned so far is unspoken stories that's related to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people in Australia. Yeah, so they all have different cohort of the people that I want to interview. And as you can see, like these 4 different cohorts, they all have interesting stories that they can tell people. So that's my vision, and that's what I want to achieve through this project, is to collect people's stories, tell their stories, advocate for change.
Yeah, that's such a powerful story in itself. And, there were so many aspects of it that I found where I was just nodding my head thinking this is exactly the sort of issue that we have, where we, for whatever reason, over the past couple of 100 years in Australia particularly, and this is global, so it's around the globe in various presentations, but we believe that men need to behave a certain way, and so we condition them from the moment we even conceive and know that we're birthing a boy. We seem to have this notion that they have to be dressed in blue, they have to play with Tonka trucks, and they have to not cry. So the moment a little boy falls over, oh, don't cry, you'll be fine. Like, they're not fine. But there's that fine line in the process where we all have to be strong. So why is it a little girl is allowed to be dressed in pink and play princesses and fall over and cry her heart out and be picked up and hugged as though it's all, the way we should be? There's a line there. Making her the soft victim all the time and making him the big, strong protector, we wonder why we have massive, massive issues of male violence and female victims. And I'm not suggesting that is, the standard, or that they're, it's that predictable, but they are elements that play into that. And I think what you're doing is so vital. We need to help men to understand that, not only for them to feel safe sharing their feelings, but to challenge society and say, what is it with this whole, we need to be, socialized and conditioned a certain way? What is with that? So it's going to be interesting to see how that plans out. Or plays out for you.
And whilst, to add on what you've said just now as well, is that a lot of when I listen to all these stories from men, they all cry when they talk about it.
Absolutely,
right? And then I have to really, one thing that I want to challenge the society to think about as well is that, like you said just now, people, when it comes to domestic violence, the first thing they think about is always men are the perpetrator, right? They always think like that. But actually, a lot of times, that might not be the case, that I work with. Like, for example, as I said just now, men tend to internalize their feelings. They don't want to make a big deal out of certain things, whatnot. So when they get emotionally abused by their wife or their partner, or, they see that as, all right, that's fine, I'll take it. Like, emotional abuse is also a form of abuse.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not just, there are emotional, there's physical, right? Emotional abuse, it's psychological, and that actually creates a long-term damage to someone. Whereas physical, it's not good. Obviously, it's bad, But when you're physically hurt, it will recover quite quickly, right?
Yeah.
But mentally, it goes for years and years and years to stay with that person. You have no idea just how much my client has told me that so and so just told me that I'm no good. I'm never good enough.
Yeah.
Just something simple like that, it stick in their head like for many, many years. And then they just, whatever things that they do in their life, they just never seem to be good enough.
Yeah.
And that's why it creates all this anxiety and perfectionism and, that sense of control and, and all these things in their life because they feel that they're never good enough. And that's why they keep pushing it. So one simple sentence that come out from our mouth, it's so critical and strong enough to even damage someone's life and make them feel like, and that's why I always said to my clients, words have power.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
we have to be very careful with the words that we use because you can either save someone's life with words, like what we're doing in counselling and whatnot. The amount of people that I've talked to with suicidal attempts, and that kind of thing. But you can also use words to damage someone's life.
Yep.
So it's really very powerful tools that we all have, but I think a lot of people are not aware of that. And when men going through all this emotional abuse in them, and they don't deal with them correctly, I've got a lot of my male clients that come and tell me they don't go to the police and report their partner being emotionally abused or financially abused, and some of their partners like control all their finance and whatnot. All of these are a form of abuse, in relationship. But they didn't go to the police and report it because they don't want another person or in a police or someone that they don't know. They don't want to show that they're weak. They don't want to, because they have the ego in them. So see, this societal expectation is so damaging and dangerous. And that's why I thought it's time for me to challenge this. I want to change this. And that's why I want to advocate for this. And talking about vulnerability just before I because we're on this topic, I also, whilst I've got this opportunity to talk about this, I also want to mention about vulnerability. A lot of people will look at vulnerability as a weakness, right? They thought that, oh my God, like, you're being so vulnerable, you're being so weak, okay?
Yeah.
I dare to challenge anyone who listens to this podcast, tell me one person, one successful, strong person in this world that has never gone through any failure or haven't made any mistake or haven't cried or haven't been vulnerable before. You give me one name, and if you can tell me that person has never been through vulnerability to get to where they are today, I dare to say that you would not find this person today that has been successful and has never gone through vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that I have focused on throughout the times that I've been developing different projects, and my background in psychiatric nursing and just seeing so many different things that I've observed. The people that often are the ones that are the most passionate, the most compassionate, the most personally successful, and the ones that seem to be more able to be in touch with what is happening around the world and connect with people on that level are those that have been through some degree of personal disruption, upheaval, distress, trauma, whatever that might be for them, and for the most part have addressed it. And I say that this quite often you'll see the successful people, if we were to use that as an example, who seem to have it all, and they seem to be, so happy with the way their world is, but the pressure that they are under to maintain that level of success and to meet social expectation, if there is some vulnerability within them that has not been addressed and not been something that they are comfortable with, it comes out in some other form of breakdown. And I don't know why, but the one person who comes to mind, and I think it's just because it's been so public of recent times, is the Brittany Spears story. Now, I don't know anything about it. I'm personally not interested in her story, other than I see it advertised and promoted and talked about. But what stands out to me about that is she appears to have come from a relatively regular, normal, everyday, all American family. There may have been some challenges there, but she became very successful, very famous, and that happened rather quickly. But there were obviously issues there that were never addressed. Her vulnerabilities were obvious. And now she's had this horrendous breakdown in her scenario that has gone out for many years. And it's showing now that she is the product of some very broken belief systems. And will she ever recover? Will she ever emerge as the successful Britney Spears that we ever knew? Who only knows? But she's just one example, and that's probably not even a good example. But it just goes to show that we have some expectations that people are going to behave a certain way. They're going to be successful, and they're going to always be happy and, able to pursue whatever they want. And the world's going to want to know them at that level. But behind the scenes, what is going on? And a lot of the time you'll see the breakdowns happen. There are so many allegedly famous people. I'm not a big celebrity fan sort of person, so I don't tend to like to consider them as famous people. But when we look at some of perhaps our cricket stars and our football players, the male representation there, those that have become really vulnerable, they either developed drug addictions or they've been found to be abusive within the family home. And it sort of plays in a little bit to what you're talking about, is there's all this expectation and layering of social conditioning upon them. And yet some reasons, some of them just do not cope with that. And they end up with really dysfunctional coping strategies. They don't talk about how they feel. And this, I do, when you say this, when you said earlier about the different cliches that we say, oh, man up, grow some balls, I actually find that offensive. On behalf of them, I find that offensive. What does it even mean to man up? I think that's horrendous, because most of them, as you're sort of suggesting, a lot of them don't even know how to be men in today's day and age. What does it mean to man up? So there's so many layers of social conditioning. And where do you think it starts? And I know we could talk on this all day, but where do you think some of these problems with men being able to talk about their emotions and feel safe doing so and feel safe being vulnerable, where does it really start? What's that kind of the first crack in that shell?
When do I think it starts? As in, when do I think that men feel like they can't talk about their feelings? Or
do you think it starts perhaps during the time where they're children and they're being conditioned within a particular culture? Or do you think it starts when they are kind of, independent adult and they're starting to engage in their sort of more adult behaviours, relationships and that sort of thing? Sort of where do you think that they start to kind of experience that difficulty with their emotions?
You asked a very good question here, Terry. I think you have also briefly mentioned it just now. It basically starts the day when they were born. Like you said, parents already have some sort of stereotypes and, some sort of expectations that if it is a boy, then we treat it like this. If it is a girl, then it's like this. So there's like a different way of treating, these two genders, when they were born, and that these parents already have this preconceived idea in their head on how they would like to raise, these kids. And that is a very, another damaging way of, raising children. Like now in my practice, I work with children as young as 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
And you can see that, how their mind are just constantly being shaped, being controlled by the parents. What they're not allowed to actually think what they think they are, or what they want. The parents will be like, no, you better just listen to what I tell you.
Yeah.
Because obviously, you're still a kid, and I've gone through all of this. I know much better than you. I have seen so many kids like that, and kids end up in like a whole lot of mental health issues with them. And then the parents end up like, oh, I don't know why my kids is behaving like that. Now you are the psychotherapist, you're the counselor, fixed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, but then they didn't realize that this seed, which has grown into a big tree now and starting to fruit, it has some fruits, and they didn't realize that who actually planted that seed first.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And now it has grown into a big tree with all these fruits. And because you don't like the fruits, and then you'll be like, all right, I'll just get someone to chop it off, and and so that I don't have to see it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, you might not see the fruits that the outcomes, but the seeds is still there. So and who planted that seed, right?
Yeah.
It all come from the day when they were born, the way the things that they're being told, by their parents, particularly their fathers, because their dad or their father were raised in a similar way as well. They were being told by their grandfather and then the great-grandfather, is that you just have to be strong. You are the man, you're the man in the family. You can't be weak, because if you are weak, then your family will collapse. Your family wouldn't be functional. These kind of things, when you say this to men, they suddenly just feel like, gosh, there's such a huge burden that they carry. And that they can't be vulnerable. Because if they be vulnerable, what would happen to their kids? What would happen to the marriage? What would happen to their life? So they have so many things to think about, and that's why they don't want to be vulnerable. Because they don't know what to do when, with this fear that they have in them. And that's why a lot of them internalize a lot of their feelings. And they try to brush things under the carpet and hopefully not think about it. And then it just got to a point where they can't hide it anymore. And then it bursts into big fight and violence and, all those things that happened. And then men wondered why that happened to them. And then, and then the partner was like, well, you're just a no good person. You always violence, you always do this. So it's like a vicious cycle that it goes back again and again, and how toxic with these society expectations that has been sort of boxed men into certain types that, that you have to behave this way.
Absolutely.
And it is so unhealthy. And that's why I thought I am going to do something about this, whilst I might not completely change the society, because whilst I'm only one person doing this, but I don't think I'm too small to create a change.
Absolutely not. No.
Because one thing that encouraged me to go ahead is one thing that's said by Dalai Lama, is that if you think that you're too small to create a change, try to sleep with a mosquito.
Yeah. That is so fitting. Absolutely. It really is a case of no one is too small to start something. Look at Greta Thunberg, for example. One girl, she protested about climate change, sat outside school, didn't want to go to school until they actually paid attention to what she was saying. Now she's created a global movement. But whatever it is, the situation with being too small is not a reason to not start something. And if you're passionate about it, as clearly you are, which is so important, if you're passionate about it, you want to make a difference. And I think that's really so important. And from many of the things that we've mentioned here, it's a lot to do with social conditioning, judgmental behaviours, acceptance, poor communication or learning to communicate, and feeling safe.
And unhealthy expectations.
Yes. Yeah, we have so many of them, don't we? And in terms of what you're doing, obviously, you've covered off a lot of what that you are doing, and we certainly know that there is a big audience that you do it for, and across the male population specifically now with this project, although that is going to branch out into other areas. A little bit more, perhaps we can just dive into why you do it. Is there any other, perhaps more perhaps an untold story of your own that you would like to share that perhaps is the motivator behind why you're doing what you do?
I think I've touched on that, why I want to do this project, but also I think there's quite a big part of that actually links to my own stories as well, how I was raised in a very abusive family, and how I was told that I was never good enough, and how I was constantly told that I wasn't normal, as a gay person, and also I was told that constantly that I would never achieve things in my life because um, I was told all of these things by people, and then I start to see my life like manifesting those unhealthy thoughts, and then I it's very damaging to look at what that has done to my life. And with all these things that society say to men, particularly I'm also a man myself, like, so I feel that, yeah, it's right. Like there's so many stories that people haven't, well, you make that comment is because you haven't actually listened or you don't know what I've gone through.
Exactly.
And that's why people make that kind of comment. Like it's easy to say to someone, you just have to toughen up.
Yeah.
Like you just have to grow some balls and that kind of things. It's easy to say that, but you don't know behind it, like what the person has actually gone through.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
How do you know that this person, or who are you to say to the person that the person is not tough enough or the person is not strong enough when you know what you don't know 100% of what this person has gone through?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that entire story fits into the belief that I have that words can be spoken in a matter of seconds. So let's say 2 to 3 seconds, you've said something to somebody that is critical, cutting, judgmental, derogatory, hurtful, and you've done it intentionally, maybe not consciously, but the mindset is there that's an intentional way to hurt somebody. It may be that you're hurting on the inside yourself, but you're not aware of it. So you're saying things that reflect how you feel, but because you're not physically or mentally or bodily even aware of where you are at in yourself, you're forming words and saying things to somebody else to hurt them because it reflects more how you feel. But with all of that, a lot of people don't know that we often, the phrase is hurting people hurt people. Well, it's easy to say that. We know that that's been said, but what does it really mean? It means obviously that somebody who's really hurting inside may not be aware they're hurting inside. They may not know that. And because they don't know it, they're not aware then that the words they're speaking are hurting the person in front of them. It's easier to hurt the person in front because it gives you some sense of deflection away from your own emotions. It gets you a chance to feel kind of empowered in yourself because, I feel better now because I've hurt somebody. A lot of the time people don't even know that they're doing that, but they see the outcomes. So we have that kind of experience going on, and it all takes place in seconds. And yet the average person, if we were to put a sort of like an age group, the average 35-year-old is something like 900 million seconds years old. Now, it's a silly thing to say, but if you put it in time frames, if you're 900 million seconds years old, million seconds old, how many seconds of those seconds is made up of things people have said to you over the period of time? I don't know how many, I can't remember how many seconds there are in a 24-hour period, but a lot can happen in 24 hours. A lot of people can say things to you in 24 hours. So if we look at that over how many hours old are you, how many things have been said to you over the years that have just been layers upon layers upon layers. I don't know if that resonates with you, but that's the sort of way that I see it.
Exactly. I agree with what you said. And just whilst we are also talking on this, this example just came into my mind, so I thought I'll share it with you as well. Like how dangerous all these societal expectations about certain people, like, not just men, but also like, migrants and Aboriginal people, and women, all these expectations that they have. Why is that so damaging? Like, for example, that day before the this is a few months ago before lockdown, I went to High Point and I was shopping, in High Point, and this incident actually happened in front of Big W in High Point. And I witnessed that, all right? And there was this lady, and I think it's the wife or the partner. So the man was just pushing the trolley, and then they have like 3 kids with them, and then the man was pushing the trolleys. It was fine, and the man didn't say anything. But obviously, the wife is like quite angry. So the wife was like, you can see it in her face that she was quite angry. And she went to the husband and started hitting the husband. and actually at some point actually pull his face like this in front of people, everyone walking around. And then the man was obviously like trying to stop her from doing that. And because he was aware that people are there, like, so he was trying to stop it. And then the woman was just like, oh, like, still keep talking, and scolding him. And then I thought, wow, when someone did that to a man, no one jumped in, no one say anything, like, no one stopped anything. But I dare to say, if this turns around and if a man, did that to a wife in front of so many people, I think some people will step in.
Interesting that exactly as you were sort of starting to share that story, I was expecting that was exactly what you were going to say, that if people were observing that, there would have been this awkwardness and a bit of maybe embarrassed. What do we do? Oh, let's look away because we don't want to get involved, which is a real phrase that I've become very aware of. We don't want to get involved. And yet, if it were to be turned around and it was the husband or partner, male partner, doing the same physical actions towards the female, would people step in? And that's something that you might find one person might have the courage to intervene, but there is always that fear of, if I intervene, something could happen to me. So there's that tendency for people to go, oh, I don't want to get involved. And by not wanting to get involved, we want to step back, because if we distance ourselves, then we don't have to deal with our own emotional reaction that we've just had to something that obviously is upsetting to us. So we want to distance ourselves. We'll just step back and we'll watch. We like being observers. Somebody else will take action. Then we can just watch. And that seems to be something that is a pattern of human behaviour that has been going on for way, way, way too long. We live in such a violent society, unfortunately, that there is this fear and a tendency for people to want to not do anything because they do fear for their own safety. And I know myself that my background in psychiatric nursing, you learn certain things to deal with people whose mental state is not in a healthy place. And there have been times when I have literally put myself in danger to step in and address a situation, perhaps not in the best way, reflecting back on it in hindsight, but taking the action and intervening and literally letting somebody know, I'm not okay with what you just did and it needs to stop right here, right now. But there are many times when I've also stood and gone, oh, will I intervene? I don't know if I should. Is it appropriate? And then it was all about me all of a sudden. Oh, I'm embarrassed. Oh, I don't know how to deal with this. Oh, what about the victim, person, abuser situation in front of me? When do we kind of know how to overcome that boundary of, it's all about me, I need to protect me, what about my feelings, versus this is a scenario where humanity needs to step in and say something. What's your take on that?
I think people just have to be, obviously I would like to encourage people to actually step up and actually have the courage to say something, regardless of gender.
Absolutely.
Like at the moment, the society is very gender biased towards certain things. They're very gender biased. And that's what I don't feel really comfortable with that. Like I think we in Australia, we pride ourselves being a country with with a fair go, a country that talks about equality, a country that talks about justice, like social justice and that kind of things. We pride ourselves being a nation of doing these things, like being respectful to people, like being considerate and tolerant, all these things, beautiful values that we have as Australians, right? But what do we actually do about it? Like, why do we end up being so biased when it comes to gender issues? And why do we talk about equality, but then, if you're a different gender, then we treat you differently? How is that equality? And how is that, So I think some people have to be, I think, re-examined, like what they believe and what they think about it. Like, sometimes I do acknowledge that, when people can be, because when they believe in certain things and then they just keep zoning into that thing, and then they can be very biased and they didn't even notice it. They didn't even know that they're being biased, towards certain things. So I think that critical reflection is really important for us to start thinking our actions and, how are we like, what can we do here to help these people, looking at them as people rather than gender.
Yeah,
Based
absolutely.
people,
Absolutely.
rather than religion, rather than, race or color, and that kind of things. Looking at them as people.
Yeah.
So what do you do in that case? So that's what prompted me to do this as well. Like, this project is to hopefully raise more society awareness around these issues that we, whilst it's really for us to have more awareness and be more reflective of what we do in our life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so important. And I think one of the challenges that we have, as you mentioned, in society is we have these values and these belief systems, and we say these things are important to us, and we say a lot. But when it comes to the crunch, how much do we actually do about it? There is that bystander perspective where, but I'll let other people do it because those other people are better at doing that sort of stuff than I am. I don't want to put the spotlight on myself. I'm too busy and I can't do it. We have 1,000 things that we can say that will justify us not taking the actions. And yet, if we don't take an action, nothing changes. It's one thing to think something differently, but if you don't put it into action, nothing changes. And I think it's really important for people like yourself, seeing that there's something that you're passionate about, something that needs to be addressed, something that needs to change in some positive way, you are taking that action. And I think that's what's really amazing about this entire conversation that we've had. And we've definitely delved into what it is you do, who you do it for, and why you do it. I'd love to wrap up with one question that I think is really important. But before I go to that question, where will people find you online if they wanted to reach out and contact you?
They can contact me on LinkedIn. So you can just connect me on LinkedIn and just type in Coby Liew. You'll find me straight away on LinkedIn. Or please visit our website, unspokenstory.org.
No, excellent.
So that's a way that you can read some. There are some stories there already. So if you would like to read some of the stories there, feel free to go to the website unspokenstory.org, and that's where you can get a feel and get a feeling of what this project is about.
Awesome. So for anybody who does watch the YouTube channel video, or if you're tuning in via the podcast, underneath the podcast and underneath the YouTube channel in the description, there will be the explanation about what this interview is about, and also the links that you can find where Coby has just mentioned, his LinkedIn and also the website, so you'll be able to find those. And one last big question for you, Coby. What is your one big wish for humanity?
I think I will finish with a quote.
And
it's from C.S. Lewis, and it says, I really love this quote because it says that whilst we can't go back to the beginning or the past to change what has happened in the past, but we can focus on what the situation that we are in now, so that we can change our future. We can change the outcome.
Yeah.
So we can't change the past, but if what we do now determined what our future looks like.
Yeah.
So whilst I can't change the inequality in the past about certain gender or whatever groups of people, but I can certainly do something today, which I came out with the project and whatnot, in the hope to actually create a better future or world for the next generations to come.
Yeah.
And that's what I hope to achieve. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And I think it is very fitting. We can't change what's happened, but I do think, and I don't know if you'll agree with this, I think it's really, really valuable that we look at the past for the lessons. Everything that's happened in the past, we can either look at it and go, let's keep that happening, let's replicate that, let's learn from that and make that the ongoing, or we can look at it and go, whoa, no, that is just so not on. What can we do to change that? How did it become the way it was? Let's learn from that and not replicate that. Let's make a new beginning. As you've said, you can't always change the past, but you certainly can take steps today to make for a better future. Absolutely, and not just for now, but also for future generations.
And this is also another thing, before we finished, whilst you're talking on that, it's really interesting. And I also want to remind everyone of this one quote from Thomas Edison, who actually created the light bulbs. And what he said, you know how he has tried more than 1,000 times before he actually, created the light bulb and that kind of things. What he said was that, so he doesn't look at what he's done in the past as failure. He doesn't look at it as mistakes. He looks at it, he said one time, I don't look at my past as a failure or mistakes. I just learn how not to do the same thing again.
Yep.
So that's from a growth mindset rather than from a deficit mindset. So when you have two different mindsets here, it determines what your future looks like. So if you look at it from a deficit mindset, you're going to end up in a miserable situation. But if you look at your future from a growth mindset, and that's where you will achieve more things and more things in your life, because and that's what I'm practicing at the moment in my life. And I would like to share that with all of you today. And I will listen to this podcast and also YouTube channel, as a form of encouragement or reminder to all of you that if you want something, you will find ways to make it happen. Okay. That's how I want to conclude this podcast, is that, it's not about whether you can or you can't. It's about whether you want or you don't want it to do. So
absolutely.
If you want it, you will find ways to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if people understand that if there's something that is that little seed inside of themselves that they want to nurture for themselves, it can grow into something really, really powerful for themselves. All they need to do is find a way. And if they believe in something enough, you find a way. Absolutely, totally agree. Thank you so much, Coby Liew, for this interview today. It's been a really interesting deep dive into some fascinating areas. And I just want to say, I look forward to seeing that book when it does come out. And I'm sure the audience today will be looking to go to your website and find out more about this project. Thank you so much for sharing your story with Voice on Fire.
No worries. Thank you so much, Terry. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. You're watching or listening to Voice on Fire, Interviews with Intention. If you're new to Voice on Fire interviews, you'll hear from everyday amazing people on a mission to make a difference. These people are change agents, action takers, and difference makers, having a positive impact on their local community or across our global village. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell for updates on new interviews. I hope you enjoy.